Camping alone in the mountains was something I'd always wanted to do. I've always been a fan of that complete isolation, far away from everything and everyone. Just me, my tent, a flashlight, and some basic supplies. I spent the day exploring, setting up camp, and enjoying the peace of that place. When night fell, everything seemed normal. The darkness in the Ozark Mountains is something you can only understand when you experience it. The forest closes in with this dead silence, and any unusual sound gets amplified, like 10 times. I was almost falling asleep when I heard that howl. It wasn't like the usual animal noises you might hear out there. It was deep, almost like the sound was a physical thing, something I felt in my chest. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then the howl came again, closer this time, and longer, like it was calling out to something or someone. My stomach churned with nerves. I peeked out of my tent, trying to see something in the darkness, but all I could make out were the shapes of the trees. And then, out of nowhere, in the middle of all that blackness, I noticed 2 glowing dots. They looked like eyes, red eyes, staring right at me. I froze for a few seconds, not knowing if I was imagining things, or if this was actually happening. With my flashlight in hand, I tried to focus in that direction, but the beam seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness. The red eyes blinked and vanished, and every time they disappeared, I hoped it was all just my imagination. But then, the howl echoed again, now so loud it made my hands shake. A chill ran through me, and without even thinking, I started packing up, as if I could just get out of there anytime. But as I was moving the flashlight around, I realized I wasn't in control anymore. My senses felt heightened, like every sound, every movement in the forest around me was plotting to freak me out. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, like those eyes weren't just seeing me, but studying every move I made. I tried to stay quiet, but it seemed impossible. Every step I took on the dry leaves sounded like an alarm going off. I started backing away, trying to move away from those eyes, but every time I glanced back, they seemed even closer, like they were silently stalking me. I was breathing fast, trying to keep my panic under control, but fear had already taken over. In that moment, I realized I was up against something I couldn't see, and that every second there could be my last. Slowly, I started backing away, trying to make as little noise as possible, but it was like the forest refused to let me leave quietly. The rustling of the leaves sounded louder than ever, and with every move I made, I felt those eyes practically glued to my back. My flashlight started to flicker, flashing every few seconds, and the beam seemed weaker, like it was fading out along with my courage. I tried to stay calm and not think about whatever was out there, but it was impossible. Every time the howl echoed, it felt closer, more threatening. The flashlight flickered one last time and went out completely, leaving me in total darkness. My breath caught in my throat. All I could hear was my heartbeat, pounding like crazy in my chest. In my panic, I pulled out my phone to use its light, but as soon as I turned it on, I realized I was surrounded by trees that seemed closer than before, like they'd closed in on me when I wasn't looking. In the dim light, I saw something moving quickly between the trees, like a shadow creeping closer. My instinct was to run, but the darkness held me there, frozen, waiting for whatever it was to make its next move. I knew I had to get out, but my body felt paralyzed, stuck between fear and adrenaline. Every second that passed, the feeling that something was approaching got stronger, more real. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack to my left, like something heavy stepping on a branch. My body reacted on autopilot, and I started backing up, faster this time, trying not to trip. Those red eyes reappeared, closer than ever, like they had me trapped between the trees. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to run, but the fear kept me frozen, locked in a kind of terror I'd never experienced before. I realized I couldn't just stand there waiting to find out what those eyes were. I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I could, and started running in the direction I thought would lead me back to camp. But in the dark, everything looked the same. Each tree was just a shapeless shadow, and my vision was limited to the shaky light from my phone, which was trembling in my hand as I ran. I stumbled a few times, tripping over roots and rocks I couldn't see, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the howl echoed again. Only now it was so close it felt like it was just a few yards away. I don't know how I was still moving, but fear was pushing me forward, even though I barely knew where I was going. Gradually, my frantic run started to slow down. I was exhausted, my legs were burning, and my breathing was a mix of panic and exhaustion. The darkness around me felt thicker, and I started to wonder if I was even running in the right direction or just getting myself more lost in the woods. When I stopped for a second to catch my breath, I heard the sound of branches snapping again, but this time it came from every direction, like something, or maybe several things, was closing in on me. The paralyzing fear returned full force, and all I could think about was finding a way out before it was too late. Trying to come up with any plan, any way to escape, I started walking slowly, trying to stay as quiet as I could. But I knew, somehow, that I wasn't alone. I felt this heavy presence, something watching me just a few feet away, even if I couldn't see it clearly. It was this oppressive feeling, like the air around me had thickened. I wasn't sure if I should keep moving or try hiding and wait for whatever it was to pass by. But before I could decide, I felt a chilling shiver run down my spine, and I was absolutely sure that whatever it was about to make its move. That's when, in the dead silence, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, along with a low, dragging breath. It was like someone, or something, was walking slowly, without any rush, but with the certainty it would catch me. My survival instinct kicked in, and I ran again. Even though my legs were barely holding up, all I could think was that I needed to get away, that I couldn't let it get close. I glanced back quickly, and for a second, I saw a tall, thin silhouette between the trees, those red eyes glowing in the darkness. My heart nearly stopped, but I forced myself to keep running. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spotted the faint outline of my car through the trees. Dawn was just starting to break, and that tiny bit of light gave me a last push of hope. I jumped into the car and, with trembling hands, turned the key in the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I didn't think twice. I hit the gas and sped off, feeling a mix of relief and fear. I didn't look back, but as I drove away, I swear I saw those eyes in my rearview mirror, watching me until I disappeared down the road. To this day, I've never been able to explain what happened, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. I've always been the kind of person who loves long, challenging hikes, and the Ozarks seemed perfect for a day out in nature. The plan was simple: follow the marked path, spend the day deep in the forest, and head back before sunset. But things took a turn that I still can't fully process. At some point, maybe because I was too focused on the scenery around me, I realized I was off the trail. I looked around, but the familiar dirt path had completely disappeared, as if it had just vanished right under my feet. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and that shift in light made everything feel strange. The forest, which had felt so welcoming just hours ago, was now eerily quiet and a little too dark. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought he was just another hiker, maybe someone who knew these mountains better than I did. But as he got closer, a chill ran through me. His skin, it had this strange blue tint to it. Not like someone who's just cold. No, this was a deep blue, like nothing I'd ever seen on a person. He smiled in a way that was both friendly and just off. He waved and said he knew a shortcut, that he could help me find my way back. The logical part of my brain was telling me to decline, but being lost as I was, I took him up on his offer. He walked ahead, and I followed without question, but something about the way he moved felt wrong. Each step he took was slow, almost choreographed, like he was trying to keep a rhythm that didn't fit the rough terrain. The trees grew denser around us, and the silence was almost absolute, like the forest itself was swallowing up any sound. Every minute, the light faded more, and I found myself surrounded by shadows. I couldn't shake this growing unease, like every step was leading me further from any exit. Still, I kept following, because the thought of being lost alone in that vast darkness seemed even scarier. After a while, I started noticing that there wasn't an actual trail. He was just moving through the forest, stepping over branches and dried leaves, without any visible path to follow. By now, I was seriously doubting his help, but he never looked back to see if I was still following. It was like he knew I had no choice, and every time I thought about stopping, a part of me insisted he was my only shot at getting out of there. While we walked, I noticed he wasn't making any effort to find his way. He didn't look around, didn't check his surroundings, just kept moving in a straight line through that uneven ground. That's when it hit me. Maybe he wasn't leading me out of the forest, but deeper into it. Panic started creeping in, and my breathing got heavier. I tried convincing myself I was just being paranoid, that he was just an odd-looking guy with a strange appearance, but everything about him felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. And worse, I started wondering if he was even human. My mind was a mess of doubts and fear, and every thought I had just made me feel even more trapped. Finally, in a moment of bravery, I decided to ask where exactly he was taking me. He stopped for a second, still not looking back, and told me in this strangely calm voice that we were almost there. But the way he said it, it had this tone that felt so final, so absolute, that it sent a chill down my spine. At that moment, all I wanted was to turn around and run, but I felt frozen, unable to make a single move. There was something about his presence that felt like it had a hold over me, like every step in the opposite direction would somehow be impossible. I looked around and realized the whole environment had changed. The trees were taller and twisted, like a scene pulled from a nightmare, and the silence was almost suffocating. That's when I noticed I couldn't even hear my own footsteps anymore, like we were in some place that didn't belong to this world. I tried to stammer an excuse to stop, but my voice seemed to vanish into thin air. All I could do was watch the meticulous way he walked, like every step was calculated with this eerie precision. I knew something was terribly wrong, but at the same time, it felt impossible to fight it. The sense of dread kept growing, like he was leading me toward a place I wouldn't be able to escape. In the back of my mind, one question kept pounding. How could someone who moved like that, with such a disturbingly calm demeanor, possibly be helping me? The whole place started to feel suffocating in a way I didn't know was possible. The darkness around us felt thicker, like it was closing in, and there was this strange metallic smell in the air, something I'd never experienced before. Every twisted tree, every elongated shadow made me feel more and more trapped. The worst part was the growing feeling that I was completely alone with him, like the forest itself had cut us off from the rest of the world. I decided I couldn't keep going. I stopped walking and said, my voice shaky, that I didn't want to follow anymore, that I needed to go back. He turned slowly, and his eyes, which I hadn't really looked into until then, stared at me in a way that froze me to the core. They weren't just cold, they were empty, like something vital was missing, like he was just inhabiting that body. He didn't say a word, but the silence between us was loaded with a threat that paralyzed me. I tried to muster the courage to take a step back, but that's when he gave me this slight smile, the kind that doesn't show joy but something far more sinister, like he was satisfied. At that moment, I felt like there was no way out, that I was trapped there with him, and that any attempt to escape would only entertain him. With the last bit of courage I had, I tried stepping back, hoping he'd lose interest in me. But every time I backed away, he stepped forward, slowly, keeping the same calculated pace, like he was toying with my fear. My heart was racing, and all I could hear was my own heavy breathing. The worst part was the feeling that he knew exactly what I was thinking, like he could read my mind and was savoring every bit of my panic. Every step he took seemed to make the darkness around us close and even more, as if it had a life of its own, like it was conspiring with him. Suddenly, I felt a deep coldness that ran through my entire body, but it wasn't the kind caused by a breeze. It was something much deeper, like it was coming from him. Finally, when I was close to total panic, he stopped, just a few steps away from me, and whispered something that, even in a low voice, echoed through the forest. He said, "You've reached the end now." Driving at night always had a bit of an eerie vibe for me, but I never thought something like this could actually happen. I was winding my way through the Ozarks, and it was late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. Everything around me was just pitch black and silent. I was tired, already mentally preparing myself for a long, boring drive. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed this light right next to my car, like it was following me. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from the dashboard or something, but it didn't add up. That light was strong, almost hypnotizing, and it seemed to float, almost like it was alive. As I tried to keep my eyes on the road, the light split into several smaller ones, almost like they were breaking apart and dancing around me. It was totally surreal. I'd never seen anything like it, and for a second, I thought maybe I was just hallucinating from exhaustion, but at the same time, it didn't feel like something my mind could make up. The lights looked like they wanted me to follow them. Every time I tried to ignore them and just keep driving, they'd reappear up ahead, even brighter and more blinding, as if they were leading me, or worse, playing some kind of twisted game with me. The way those lights moved was strange, almost hypnotic. I was trying to focus on the road, but ignoring them was impossible. Every time I glanced away, they'd somehow pop up right in front, practically blinding me. I started to speed up, like I could somehow outrun them, but the faster I went, the faster they seemed to move too, almost like they knew exactly what I was trying to do. The road that had once been so familiar started to feel different. The signs, the turns, everything felt out of place, like I had somehow entered a loop, just driving aimlessly while those lights circled around me. At this point, fear was starting to take over. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if this was some kind of weird natural phenomenon, a sick prank, or something way worse. I started feeling like I was being watched, like there was something else out there hidden in the darkness along with the lights. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and as much as I wanted to just stop the car and breathe, something inside told me that stopping was the last thing I should do. I kept driving, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing inside the car. I didn't know what those lights were or what they wanted, but the feeling that they were toying with me just kept growing. The road seemed more endless with every second, like I was trapped in some stretch that had no end, no gas station, no houses, no landmarks at all. I reached for my phone to check the GPS, but to my horror, I had no signal. That sent my panic through the roof. I was alone in this pitch-black void, with these strange lights surrounding me, and no way to call for help. My hands were shaking as I tried to keep control of the car. For a moment, the lights seemed to dim, and I thought maybe they were finally fading away. But then, out of nowhere, they gathered in front of me in a formation that blocked the road. It was like they were daring me, testing how far I'd go to try to escape them. I didn't know if I should try to drive through or swerve around, but something in my gut told me not to face them head-on. I gripped the wheel harder and decided I had to lose those lights somehow. I veered the car sharply off the road, trying to cut through a makeshift path I spotted between the trees. But it was like those lights anticipated my every move. They showed up among the trees, flashing and swirling around like they were taunting me. I started feeling completely helpless, like I was just a pawn in whatever twisted game this was. The trees blurred past me, and that feeling of being watched only got stronger, like something was out there, waiting for the right moment to make its move. The silence of the night was so thick and heavy. All I could hear was the sound of my foot pressing harder on the gas and the buzzing of those lights around me. I had no idea where I was anymore, and I started to realize that no matter how much I tried to dodge or speed away, the lights were always one step ahead, appearing exactly where I least expected. In a moment of panic, I thought about stopping the car and just running, but the thought of being out there, exposed in that dark, made me drop that idea fast. As I kept trying to escape, the fear started mixing with this weird, kind of mental exhaustion. I had no idea how long I'd been driving on that endless road, and my whole body felt trapped between terror and fatigue. I started noticing that the details of the road were getting hazier, almost like I was passing the same place over and over. And each time the lights appeared, they seemed brighter, like they were draining what little energy I had left. Sweat was running down my face. My eyes were burning from trying so hard to stay focused, but the road kept stretching out like some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then, without warning, the lights stopped. Just like that, they vanished. Relief hit me, but it lasted only a second because I realized I was just sitting there, parked in the middle of the road with no idea how I'd gotten there. My whole body was shaking, like I'd just been sucked dry. I looked around, and all I saw was total darkness. No lights, no sounds, just this overwhelming feeling of isolation. Whatever those lights were, they had somehow led me to a place where time and direction felt meaningless, and to this day, I've never been able to figure out what really happened that night. After sitting there for a bit, still trying to process what went down, I decided to turn the car back on and head back the way I thought I'd come. But something felt wrong, like I was driving on a road I'd never been on before. The few details I could recognize, like turns or markings on the road, seemed distorted, unreal. I felt like I'd been dumped somewhere that didn't quite belong, like those lights had left me in some kind of in-between place. At one point, I started wondering if I was even awake, or if this was some twisted nightmare I couldn't break free from. When I finally saw an exit sign, the relief was almost unbelievable. I took the turn, merged onto a main road, and eventually found a small town where I pulled into a gas station. Still shaky, I got out, leaned against the hood of my car, and took a deep breath. I looked around, half expecting one of those lights to still be following me, but everything was normal. To this day, I can't explain what happened in the Ozarks that night, and every time I try to talk about it, people think I'm either exaggerating or just making it up. But whatever I saw out there still makes me check my rearview mirror whenever I'm driving alone at night. I started the hike excited with my friends. We'd all heard about Blowing Cave and the mysteries surrounding the place, but honestly, it all just seemed like another local legend. The plan was to explore together and snap a few photos, but I'm a bit more curious than the rest of the group, so I ended up drifting away while they got distracted near the entrance, taking in the details. I kept moving down the damp passageway, and it felt like the darkness swallowed me fast. I thought the flashlight on my phone would be enough, but it barely made a dent against the wet, strange walls. Still, I wasn't worried, until I heard an echoing footstep in the cave. It sounded like it came from behind me, and I immediately thought one of my friends was trying to scare me. When I turned around, I saw nothing, just pitch-black darkness, thick and suffocating. But what really got to me was the silence that followed. Like the cave had swallowed even the sound of my own breathing. I decided to keep moving, convincing myself I was just getting worked up for nothing. But with each step, the echo got closer, following my rhythm, almost like someone was keeping pace with me. Then I heard something that really froze me. A long, deep sigh, echoing off the walls. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the kind of cold from a damp cave, but something else, like there was a presence right there, too close for comfort. I froze, feeling my heart pound so loudly it felt like it was bouncing off the walls alongside that sigh. My first instinct was to shine my phone's flashlight behind me, but it only showed those wet, empty walls. It was like the darkness was so thick it almost swallowed the light whole after a few feet. And then, I saw it. Way in the back, just at the edge of the light, there was a figure standing still. Just a shadow, no details, just an outline in the dark, watching me. My blood ran cold. I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks, but the feeling that someone was there was too real. Instinctively, I turned and tried to run, but it was like the cave itself was holding me back. My steps felt heavier, like something invisible was pulling me back in. The exit, which should have been just ahead, seemed to get further and further away. That figure stayed back there, but it was moving now, sliding toward me somehow, slow but steady. And that whisper, I could hear it now, clear as day, in a language I didn't recognize. It was like some strange, haunting melody, each word twisting into my mind, making me dizzy and more desperate to escape. My breathing was so fast and heavy that I thought I might pass out. Panic took over in a way I'd never experienced before. My legs felt like lead, and I started to lose my sense of time and space, like I was walking in circles even though I was trying to go straight. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, almost drowning out my own steps. It was as if the entire ground was vibrating with this presence that was chasing me. I tried to speed up, but my legs felt like they were sinking, each step harder than the last. Then something happened that stopped my heart. The whisper shifted, turning into this low, cold laughter, and I felt a hand, ice cold like a draft, touch my shoulder. It was a light touch, but enough to freeze me in fear, making me feel completely exposed and vulnerable. In that instant, all the sounds stopped. The silence was absolute, crushing, and the feeling of being watched intensified. I looked forward, and suddenly, the cave's exit was there, out of nowhere, glowing with daylight from the outside. I gathered every bit of strength I had and ran as fast as I could. I ran like my life depended on it, not looking back, ignoring the pain in my legs and the exhaustion setting in. The air grew heavier with each step, and it felt like something was trying to drag me back. The exit, which had seemed so close, just kept feeling further away, like the cave itself was stretching to keep me inside. My footsteps echoed wildly, and that low, distorted laughter kept following me, getting closer with each passing second. The desperation was overwhelming. I couldn't even tell if I was breathing or not. I just knew I needed to get out of there. Finally, when I thought my legs would give out completely, I burst through the cave's entrance. The daylight momentarily blinded me, and I nearly fell to my knees as I hit the ground outside. I turned, half expecting to see something or someone emerging from the darkness, but there was just emptiness. The silence outside was as intense as it had been inside, and looking at the cave's entrance, I felt like it looked smaller somehow, like that strange, suffocating place I got lost in wasn't even real. My friends were only a few feet away, chatting like nothing had happened. I tried to explain, but it was like they couldn't even understand what I'd been through in there. To this day, I don't know what happened, but I'm certain that something or someone was in there, and it didn't want me to leave.